Welcome back to She Can, where women lead with their stories. They lead by example to guide and support others because it's easier to be what you can see. And I'm very excited to talk to Sbba Siddique today. Sbba, welcome to She Can. You're a director at the Asian Star Radio. You're a founder of Knit Your Socks Off. You're a delegate at the UN Commission on the Status of Women, and you are a cancer thriver. You're a campaigner and women's health advocate because you've experienced a more difficult journey where you were diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2022 and you knew that something was wrong with you. And it was a 6 months journey of knowing something is wrong, but experiencing gaslighting and doctors brushing you off or not believing you. So you really wanted to educate people and campaign on women's health and early detection, especially for women of South Asian heritage. Sbba, tell us a bit more about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
It's been a really rough road. It started back in sort of like the summer of 2021, where I started to generally feel unwell. There weren't any overtly visible signs. I didn't find a lump or a bump. I was just generally unwell, tired, fatigue, just, no energy, just very lots of lethargy. And as women, we always put everybody else first. And, I just ignored it and thought to myself, I was perimenopausal at the time. And I thought, you know what, let's get some vitamins, let's get some sunshine, let's do a bit more exercise as we, usually as women, we fob ourselves off. And this went on and it progressively started to get worse. I then took the step of trying to get hold of my GP just to get checked out, see what the problem was. And he actually came back to me with exactly what I had already been thinking that, oh, you are menopausal. These signs aren't of anything significant, nothing to worry about. But we are now sort of like coming up to October, November time, and I am putting on a lot of weight. I am very, very tired, lots of fatigue. By this time, I was needing to go to the bathroom a lot. I had put on a lot of weight, but it was specifically around my waist, around my belly. I hadn't put on weight anywhere else. And at that time, I didn't know that all of these things were signs of ovarian cancer,
Mm.
and it never had it crossed my mind that I was that unwell, or that I was end up having a cancer diagnosis. And I think that was one of the post my all clear, it was one of the biggest learning curves for me, that as a woman we need to be far more empowered and educated about our health, and we need to start trusting ourselves when we feel that there's something wrong in our body. Listen to yourself and go and get it checked out. It I eventually had an appointment with my dermatologist, and she looked at me and she said, Sbba, have you had your stomach checked out? And I said, oh, yeah, I've been, communicating with the GP. I've had a couple of appointments. And bear in mind, all of these appointments were either e-consults, so online, or they were over the telephone. Nobody had physically checked me.
Mm.
And I said, yeah, they've reassured me it's probably just, menopausal symptoms, maybe IBS. And she goes, no, make yourself an appointment, be firm and get yourself seen in person. And that worried me because, up until this point, we're told to trust GPs. They're the experts, they know, and we don't. And that's exactly what I did, even though my gut was telling me there's something else going on. But when she said that, this is another doctor, another expert, and they're telling me that actually there might be something wrong. So for me, all bets were off at that point. Monday morning, I was on the phone to the GP and I was insistent. I was a drama queen and I got myself seen. And even then, they were quite hesitant. So they said, okay, we'll do some baseline blood tests. And I got a phone call a couple of days later saying, oh, we're a little concerned because your cancer markers have come back slightly raised. We'd like to do some more tests. Now, for 6 months, I had been, medically gaslighted. I had been ignored. I had not been seen in person. I had been misdiagnosed. And now, all of a sudden, with that one little blood test, this, within the space of 10 days, I had had another set of blood tests, a, um, a scan, an ultrasound scan, an internal ultrasound, a CT scan, and an MRI. And in 10 days, I was told, Mrs. Siddique, we suspect it's ovarian cancer. That day, my world fell apart because I had spent the last 6 months just thinking, okay, I'm menopausal. That's
Mm.
all it is. I'll take some vitamins, I'll get some exercise. But it wasn't it. And that was the day that my life has changed irrevocably.
Yeah.
And I then embarked on a very, very difficult treatment journey. I've had two surgeries, I've had IV chemo, and I've had oral chemo. Um, when I was first diagnosed, they gave me the option of would I like to have surgery first or chemo. For me, my logical brain said, get it out. Let's have surgery first. So in April of 2023, I was booked in for my first surgery, but 2 days before, I was told I was bumped because a more important case came along. And that was hard because you prepare yourself for surgery, but what was coming next, I was completely unprepared for. They rescheduled my surgery for the end of April. I went in, and as far as I was concerned, I had done all the mental health work that I needed to prepare myself for major surgery. They had prepared me and they'd said it was going to be big. It was going to be a full debulking, which means everything goes. It's a hysterectomy plus extras. So I went in and surgery happened. I woke up in recovery, sort of like 4 or 5 hours later. And all I remember is seeing my husband and children around the bed. And all I can hear them say, my husband saying is, they've done nothing. They've done nothing. I was I wasn't lucid. I was in and out because the anesthetic had affected me quite badly. And also, the morphine that I was on was pet from pain relief was giving me hallucinations, visual and auditory hallucinations. And it was awful. So I couldn't comprehend what was going on. It- that night I spent just hallucinating. I was hallucinating all sorts of things, horse hooves, horses. I was picturing, that the moment I opened my eyes, I'd seen my husband and children at the foot of my bed. I pictured them as the four horsemen of the apocalypse sat back on horses. It was absolutely crazy. And the nurses would be walking past and I would hear clip, clop, clip, clop. Um, I woke up the next morning and it's then that I found out that they had opened up and they had seen that the scans hadn't shown the entire spread of the cancer. It's metastasized. It had gone to the bowel. It had gone to my duodenum. It had gone to my appendix. So what they had done was they had removed all the ascites, which is the liquid water that builds up in the stomach lining to relieve some of the bloating and the pain that I was in. But they had done nothing. I had 48 stitches, chest to pelvis. Nothing had been taken out. I was devastated. I didn't want to be there, just wanted to come home, but they wouldn't let me home because you have to be able to go to the bathroom, have a poo and a pee and do all of that and show them that you're walking to be able to go home. And I got up. I got up out of that bed. I forced myself. I pushed myself. And within 6 hours, I was home because I just could not comprehend staying there. It was all for nothing. And that's how I was devastated. I still have PTSD from that moment, those times, the hallucinations. And it's the mental health challenges were huge. I
Mm.
then had a recovery period. The next step was IV chemo to try and shrink the tumors. I did 12 rounds of IV. It was awful, debilitating, every single side effect you can imagine. It chucked it at me. I developed peripheral neuropathy, which is pain and tingling in my feet and where the nerve endings are affected. And I'm left with a permanent disability. But after 12 weeks, they wanted to do a checkup scan to see how far the shrinkage had gone, and it was zero. So my surgery had failed, the IV chemo had failed. My options were getting smaller and my world was getting darker. Um, the next steps were the final option they had for me was oral chemo, which was a tablet a day, which was fine. I needed to do whatever I needed to do to get back to being able to go back to surgery. Um, and I went for it. So I did the oral chemo for about 7 weeks, but there was an additional side effect that that particular tablet has, and it is a skin rash. And I went online, I went on Google, I went on, the NHS websites, and I was quite strict from the beginning that I only looked at reputable websites. So it was, the NHS, Macmillan, cancer charities, and things like that, because you can fall down a Google rabbit hole and just get lost. Um, and I found nothing. I found nothing on what that rash would look like on South Asian skin. But I didn't have any other option, so I went ahead with it. It was 7 weeks of hell. Within the first 3 weeks, the rash developed. It started off as acne on my face and then spread to the entirety of my body. By week sort of like 6, I was covered in it from head to toe. I was hospitalized 4 times. My neutrophil levels were shot. I had infections. I had sepsis. And the A&E doctors diagnosed the rash as what they would see on an acid burn victim. I was covered in it from head to toe, the palms of my hand, the soles of my feet. And my skin started to shed, and it was shedding. I'd stand up, there'd be puddles of skin on the floor. We were hoovering 4 or 5 times a day just to clear that up. Outside, my skin was burning. Inside, it was freezing. My vital organs were trying to draw the strength to be able to repair the skin. So they were drawing heat from the internal organs, and that's why the skin was so hot. This meant that I'd be shivering, I'd be freezing cold inside, but burning hot outside. So I'd get the shivers. I'd shiver and shake for like 4 or 5 hours at a stretch, literally till I passed out because my body just couldn't cope with it anymore. I did that for 3 weeks because I was adamant. I wanted the shrinkage to be enough that the surgeons would say yes, because there was a possibility they'd say no. Um, I had, by 7 weeks, it had taken me to hell. I had been broken physically through IV chemo and now the effects of oral chemo and the rash. But this took me to a place where it broke me mentally because I had maintained strength throughout and I had tried to be resilient, but it broke me mentally, emotionally. I couldn't take any more. And there was a point where I said, I want to end treatment. I want this pain to end, but I want life to end because I couldn't take it anymore. And so mm, I stopped. I said to my oncologist, I can't do this anymore. Whatever is going to happen is going to happen. I can't do it. So she said, right, let's do a scan. The baseline scans came back as great. The surgeon was happy to operate again. I saw the surgeon 2 weeks prior to surgery, and she looked at my scar site because that's where they were going to operate again. And because the rash had been all over my body, she said, I can't at the moment. Theoretically, I'm happy to operate, but because of how the scar is, the rash is on there, that needs to heal because the risk of infection is too great. So here I am with another setback, and we'd been waiting for a dermatology referral because when I had had the IV chemo, I had had psoriasis before that, so it was kind of like all coming and joining together. So the dermatology referral had been put in about 6 to 8 months prior to all of this, and it still hadn't come through. Eventually, I had to go privately. I had to go and see a doctor privately, and I got medication and creams, steroids. I saw the surgeon 2 days before the operation, and she said, "Fine, it's enough. It's cleared it up enough for me to risk it." And I said to her at that point, I said, what do you think my chances are? She goes, if I got 50% of the tumors, I would be happy. And I said, I can take 50%. We'll deal with the rest afterwards. And so in February of 2023, I went and had my second surgery, and she got 100%. She got 100% tumor-free, no residual disease. There was a huge spread. And the reason they hadn't operated the first time round was because it had spread so far to my bowel. I would have probably required a stoma bag for life. And that was one of the things I was quite vocal about from the beginning, that I don't want that. I don't want that. Luckily, it had shrunk it enough that I only needed a bowel resection. So they removed the cancerous part, and I've lost my appendix in the process, which I don't need, but um, yeah. So it was a tough ride.
Sbba, it sounds so traumatic, and I'm so sorry for what you had to go through. I'm wondering now that you had been given the green light, right? You are currently cancer free. Um, there's so much to talk about, I think. You know, how can other people overcome the fear and somehow find a way forward within traumatic diagnoses? Maybe you can tell us a little bit in your own journey that seemed like and there are many people actually who have disproportionate reactions to medications. And this is an area that's not researched enough, and certainly not researched enough on women, right? So our health has been underfunded and under researched for so long, um, that all of those cases, all of the things that happen to you, basically have to happen because you're someone who might have needed genetic testing beforehand, or I'm not a doctor, but I've interviewed enough women to know
Yeah.
that there are resources available. They're not necessarily available on the NHS. There is a huge amount of inequality
Yeah.
in terms of women, and then definitely also South Asian women, right?
Yeah.
Which is a subcategory of us women, and that's even less researched. So what do you feel? Maybe we start with your learnings, actually, Sbba. Tell us about your main learnings, looking back about this journey. What are your main learnings and takeaways? And how have you then transformed this pain to a purpose
Yeah.
of being a campaigner and a health advocate, and um, campaigning for early detection?
Oh my gosh, definitely. There's so much to unpack there. I don't know where to begin. So, talking about my own journey and pushing through and powering through that pain. I'm a Muslim by faith, and my faith played an absolutely huge role. And even women that I spoke to when I was going for chemo, there are, it is a time that brings you back to your core, to your essence. Cancer was life changing, but it was also life affirming. And I found that with many people that I talk to, that it gives you the opportunity to slow down, reflect, and actually think back on what have you done in your life that's brought you here? And I
Mm,
certainly did. And looking back now, that pause gave me the ability to understand and identified where I was wrong, where I was going wrong. And there were lots of places where I was going wrong. And I think one of the most important things was, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, where I was always putting myself at the bottom of the list. As women, we generally do. We're
yeah.
caregivers, if you're parents, if you're a mum, you put your children first, your household first. And I wasn't taking care of my own needs. And I was negating that me time or that self-care time, or just paying attention to those niggles that were going on in my body. And I think that was an important learning curve. As I said, my faith played an absolutely huge role because that kept me grounded. Even when I was in my most darkest moments, on the oral chemo where I was giving up on life, my faith brought me back because I'd reached, it was I remember the time quite clearly because it was this 3, 4 day period over a weekend where my symptoms, I had just come back home from hospital. I had had sepsis and I was rock bottom. And I, it wasn't anything tangible, it wasn't anything physical, but it was just like a light had been switched on inside of me, and I felt a connection with God where I felt hopeful. And that faith is what drew me out of the darkness that I had found myself in, but also the love that surrounded me. And, I had made a decision quite early on in my diagnosis that my children and my husband were going to be fully involved in my care, and they were going to be fully involved in my treatment and my treatment pathway and my journey. And I'm so glad I made that decision because in those 7 weeks, I wasn't able to advocate for myself, but they knew what my wishes were. So they were able to advocate for me, but they also became my biggest cheerleaders. They pushed me. They pushed me every single day. I mean, I was rock bottom as a person who is so independent pre-cancer and pre-diagnosis, running a household, running a full-time business, I run a community organization as well. I was constantly on the go. And all of a sudden, I am now having to rely on other people to even take me to the toilet. And sometimes I didn't even make it to the bathroom. And my children were having to clear up my mess. My husband was having to clear up my mess. That was soul destroying.
Mm,
The strength that took, my faith gave me. The purpose came after my NED when I had experienced a rubbish treatment journey. So I had faced delays, I had faced misdiagnosis, all of those things. And I women, women's health is not taken seriously. It is severely underfunded. And you're spot on when you say that women's health is not a priority. But then when you have women of color, there is even less help and support. And their outcomes are far, far worse. I experienced all of that and saw all of that. Even if I didn't experience it, I saw it with my own eyes firsthand. And that frightened me because I've got two daughters. And we have certain things in our life as women are inevitabilities. Puberty and period health, completely ignored. When you're of fertile age, maternal health, completely ignored. And when you're perimenopausal, menopausal, again, completely not even on the scale. So I wanted to change that. I wanted to change that because the fact that cancer rates are increasing means there are so many that are inevitably going to follow. And this cannot be the case for my daughters, and their daughters, and generations that are going to come. So cancer gave me a voice. It gave me a mission. It gave me a challenge because what I had experienced, although it was quite an extreme, and I know other people that I've spoken to on this path, their journeys have been a lot easier. But that's not to say the mental health and the physical health challenges that they had, I'm not knocking those. But what I'm saying is that in what I experienced was probably quite an extreme. The other thing that I also found was that yeah, there's a healthcare system that is just not designed for the historically marginalized communities. But my own community was rubbish. My own community was rubbish at talking about cancers. There are still so many taboos and so many stigmas that we hold that we are so close to that cancer conversation. Female health, particularly gynae health, is completely ignored because first and foremost, within my community, a woman's body is looked in a sexual way, not necessarily in a medical way.
Mm.
So when you talk about periods or you talk about ovaries or wombs or vagina, God, that's taboo. That's a no-no. How can we normalize these conversations? That's what I wanted. I wanted to be able to women have the opportunity to be able to advocate for themselves, believe in when something is wrong, you go and get it checked out and you believe yourself about it and empower them to be able to do that. But if we're not talking about these things, how are we going to do it? So that's kind of like where the journey took me, and it was very organic. It just very naturally happened. And I work in media, I work on radio, and for me, it was just using my voice for a purpose. And that's what I've gone on to do.
Yeah, Sbba, which is really a beautiful and powerful story. So, what changes do you want to see for your daughters?
I think I want them to be able to be educated. Far more, there needs to be far more women's health awareness. So they are aware of how everything works, how their bodies work. There needs to be far more information and education. Prevention is key. Not only is it a business case, but it's, for the women that are going to be diagnosed, it's going to mean early diagnosis is going to mean less invasive treatments, better outcomes. It's a simpler formula. I want more health education. I want more health information. I want them to be able to be empowered to self-advocate. And I want them to be able to know where they can, be signposted so that they can know if something is wrong, where to be able to go to for help. Education is key. Knowledge is power. We all know that. And education is absolutely key. It's important that alongside the education, women also feel that they have a voice to be able to challenge because we don't. I, for 6 months, believed my GP, and what he was telling me, I took, even though my gut was telling me there is definitely something wrong. That education piece needs to extend to, I didn't know I could have gone and asked for a second opinion. It's all about empowering people to be able to make their own decisions. That's for me, education.
Yeah. Sbba, so give us a little bit of what really matters to you now, and how do you want to matter in the world going forwards?
What matters to me now is It's always mattered, my family, my faith. But the journey gave me the ability to appreciate them on a completely different level. It's also given me the ability to ignore things that would bother me so much before because it's just given a different perspective.
Mm,
Whereas, I mean, for me now, I come at life with gratitude, far more gratitude than I had before. That's not to say that I was a person that's entitled, but everything now just seems so much more beautiful, so much more special. And I don't get hung up on the negative. I don't
mm,
focus on the negative. Whereas before, I would have probably spent a lot of time. And that's with the situations. It could be friendships, it could be situations, it could be relationships, whatever. I would get hung up on the, oh, well, why did they do that to me? Oh, why did that happen? I don't. It's a case of, okay, it's happened. I process it and I leave it. And I focus on the positive and what positive changes and what positive energy I can bring into my life. And that's what's changed. For me, for what I would like to see happen, or how I'm going to step forward into life, is that it's really become important to me that I, if I am able to be the voice for somebody who feels they don't have a voice, and there are very, very many reasons why some women they don't feel that they don't have a voice, whether it's relationship pressures, societal pressures, community pressures, family pressures, for whatever reason. For me, that's what I want to be able to try and change. I want to be able to be somebody that empowers others to recognize the strength that they do have, because that's what many women feel. They have the strength, they have the resilience, but they are just gaslighted and manipulated into believing that they don't. And I think I want to be, if I can just, I want to be able to make them see themselves and the value that they truly have.
yeah, Saba, which is so beautiful. And women like you coming forwards, telling your stories, you will support and guide others. And I've seen this now, over the last couple of years of doing She Can. It's a very, very, very powerful proposition. I always think we started as a tiny startup. We had 50 women in our thing. We have 500 women now and
Wow.
3 million listeners. And with no marketing budget. And it's not that we're interviewing famous women on here. So, this is very powerful. And everyone telling their stories has so much impact. And I see that from the comments and the listener numbers, and actually men are listening too.
Yeah,
50% of our listeners are men, and that is an important fact. We need to do this together. We need to change things together because we're in it
absolutely.
together, right? We
Absolutely.
want happy friends, we want happy wives, we need happy mothers. We need women to feel well in themselves, to be an important part of our societal structures, and raising the next generations, birthing and raising the next generations.
Yeah, that allyship is vital.
Yeah. Saba, so as a campaigner and advocate for women's health, how does that look like for you now? What does success mean for you here?
I wear a number of hats. So I campaign for a number of leading charities. One is Macmillan, the other is Target Ovarian Cancer, which is a ovarian cancer specific charity. I'm an ambassador for a charity called Black Women Rising, and I am co-lead of a PPIE group, which is based out at the University of Birmingham, where we are creating a series of monologues which are taking women's stories but creating them artistically into monologues, but also using them as education pieces, not only for patients, but also professionals. Because often what happens is we just become a diagnosis for clinicians, and we
Yeah.
are more than that. Our stories are so, so powerful. And you mentioned something earlier on, if you can't see it, you can't be it.
Mm.
100%. And that was one of the main driving forces to what brought me to campaigning and advocacy. Because when I first was diagnosed, in the supporting literature that I was given, in the websites that I was looking at, I saw no one that looked like me. And when you don't see somebody that looks like you think that that's not for you. And that's one of the first things that I wanted to campaign and chain for is, visibility and representation. That matters. It's absolutely huge. And the campaigning work is around not only just raising awareness, because that's vital, but it's also for pushing government for more funding, because women's health is severely underfunded.
Yeah.
So the UK government are currently undertaking their a review of their 10-year national cancer plan. I'm fortunate that I'm a patient voice on NHS England's National Cancer Programme, so I am feeding in the patient opinion and voice to that plan. And I think that's what is vital. It's essential that you have the demographic that is using the services. It is essential that you have them at the table when these decisions are being made. It's great for clinicians to be there, and it's great for politicians and ministers and everybody else. But we're the people that have actually got the practical experience of the services that you are putting together. So who better to involve? Campaigning for me is around awareness, it's around education, and it is around improving funding for women's health.
Amazing. So, Sbba, if you could have one message for our Prime Minister Keir Starmer, what would that be?
Women's health needs to be given priority. It's women's pain has been ignored for far too long. We make up 50% of the population. The not only the social but the economic impact of um, women's health to the economy. So, just a cancer diagnosis. I run my own business. So my husband and I run it together. All of a sudden, 50% of the 50% of the workforce is gone. So the economic impact to a household and to a business and to the economy generally, when women are having to be out from work because of their health, is absolutely huge. And I think the strongest message that I would have is that we need to ensure that we are taking care of women and we are funding women's health to provide better care and support. And it isn't just around, physical, but it's around mental health as well, because every single one of every sickness, every ailment, every cancer diagnosis brings with it mental health challenges that severely, severely impact women as well. Um, yeah, that's what needs to happen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Sbba, and I have experienced it myself where I had an issue, and because I react differently from a lot of other people to medications, etc., I'm always grouped as, the sort of nervous patient. I'm not
Mm,
actually a nervous patient.
no,
I just react differently and I know it. So I tell them, if you give me the same anesthesia as you do everybody else, I will be asleep for a lot longer than anybody else. And so, those kind of things. So you're immediately grouped as someone who is sort of, you know, I don't know, difficult. And they
yeah,
immediately think that I have, mentally I'm challenged in one way or another, which I always think that is not actually true. It's just
absolutely
that
not.
I know myself better. And so I'm very, very grateful for all the work that you do, Sbba, and every other
Thank you.
woman who has gone through traumatic health diagnoses, has come out the other end, and uses her life to purposefully change the reality for future generations of women. And I think that the visibility and representation, awareness, education, and most importantly, fighting for funding, because that's where the power lies. Without funding, we're not going to get there.
Absolutely.
So what are your plans and goals, Sbba, with all of this?
It's for me, particularly around ovarian cancer, because that's what my diagnosis was. It is to raise more awareness. Most women aren't aware of the symptoms of ovarian cancer. Um, up until I got my diagnosis, I thought I was being such the perfect person because I was going for my regular smear and that my smear test would have picked it up. But it's simple things like that. It's all around awareness, symptoms awareness, and general women's health awareness. It is just empowering women to be able to self-advocate. That's what my focus is. Um, I I want to be able to ensure that women like me, women that look like this, are out there talking the good talk, fighting the good fight, and ensuring that we are making and carving a way for those that will inevitably follow to have a much easier journey,
Mm,
and to have a much more empowered journey where they are able to take control of their own health.
yeah. Saba, and what would you like our listeners to take away from your story?
I would love them to take away the following few things. Um, Never lose hope because there is always hope. I had a really, really tough ride. And for me, there was a point where I was with very limited and very few options. But there was still hope. You have to remain proactively positive. Mindset is absolutely everything. I think over and above so many of other things that I would like to say, I would say trust yourself. When you feel that there is something wrong or something isn't right, go and get it checked out. It might just be nothing, and that's great. But if it is something, the earlier that it is caught, the better it is
Yeah.
for you, and the path that you may then have to take.
Mm.
I think it's also about share your knowledge. When you are aware of things around women's health and, just positive things, share them with your friends. Bring them along for the journey. Bring them along for the education. Support each other. Advocate for each other. Because the one thing that I found is that, like, I do a lot of public speaking as well. So I do keynote speeches and engagement at women's health events. And one of the things that I always get at the end is I have women coming and saying to me, thank you. And I'm always confused. And it's like, thank you for what? I've kind of like just shared me in my journey. And it's like, no, it's not that. Um, it's kind of like you've given me permission to have these conversations
Yes.
because like I've grown up thinking I'm not allowed to talk about this. I'm not allowed to talk about that for whatever societal reasons, cultural reasons. It is all about being that person that empowers somebody else. I don't, my story could have gone in a very different way where I could have gone into a hole and I could have just shut down and hid myself from the world. I've taken that and I've purposed it to something that empowers me because when I share my journey, often it is traumatic because it is relived trauma, but it is also just such the high that I get from the response that I get from other people, knowing that I have helped them, knowing that I have made somebody else's day slightly better or helped them to be more engaging in themselves and do better for themselves. Um, yeah,
Saba, so we both agree, and you very much from experience can say we have to shout louder. As women, we have to speak up, we have to shout loud because that's when changes will happen.
absolutely. I mean, I can sit here and I can be shouting. You can be sitting there and you can be shouting, but we've got to come together. We have to collaborate because when we are collaborating, not just working in our silos, our voices are going to be amplified and we will be heard and we will be listened to.
And we can demand things and we can demand funding.
Yeah. And I think, you know what? We are not demanding something that isn't already been given to our male counterparts because, we can clearly see that men's health is quite proactively funded. So currently, I'm also doing a lot of work with the World Ovarian Cancer Coalition. I sit on their advisory board, and they've just released the economic burden of ovarian cancer. It's a study that they've done, and they've done that across 11 countries, and looking at ovarian cancer and the economic impact of an ovarian cancer diagnosis and how that differs across several countries across the world. We are embarking on some exciting projects to try and get the ovarian cancer itself recognized as a global priority. And it all comes back to education and funding. So the work of the World Ovarian Cancer Coalition. We've got World Ovarian Cancer Day that's coming up on the 8th of May. So we will be shouting quite loudly about visibility, about representation, and about awareness.
Sbba, I'm so grateful for you to have contacted me to tell your story for She Can. It's a very important story.
Thank you.
There are so many lessons in your story. And yes, it gives other people permission to believe in themselves,
Yeah,
advocate for themselves, put in that phone call and say, I feel something is wrong. I do want to get checked. And getting educated about the symptoms, um, finding solutions, and also asking for help.
yeah,
Right. And this is what we women don't do. We always
yeah.
think we have to do everything by ourselves and we have to be perfect and we have to be this and that and the mom and the caregiver and the thing and the thing. And I think, sometimes there is a moment to pull the handbrake, to take stock, advocate for yourself, find solutions, and then pass that power on to the next person, which is exactly what you're doing now. So thank you
Absolutely.
so much, Sbba, for everything you do. You're heard, you're seen, you're believed, and you're important to be out there telling your story to support other women.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the ability to share my voice even further. I hope that it's resonated with some, and I hope it's given you the incentive to take care of yourself a little bit more, be a little bit more kinder to yourself. And you are doing absolutely great. And thank you for connecting me with your audience.